Welcome in, everybody, to the best in paranormal podcasting. This is Darkness Radio. I'm Tim Dennis. It is an exciting Thursday, everybody, as I'm bringing in some old friends, and I got to tell you, this is going to be a good show. There's a book out there that I want you all to check out, and it's written by two investigators that I believe are going to change the way that we look at investigating, and especially on investigating not only just in the field ourselves, whether you're a hobbyist, whether you're a professional ghost hunter, if you want to call yourself that, or if you're aspiring to be on television, or if you are on television, because I know there's probably going to be some people who are on television who are going to be listening to this program. The book is written by two of the investigators who are on A&E's Ghost Hunters, Brandon Alvis and Mustafa Gotallari. The book is called Elements of a Haunting. Let's bring them in now and say hello to them. Brandon and Mustafa, welcome back to Darkness Radio.
Tim, always a pleasure. Thanks for having us back.
Thank you for being here, guys. Let me tell you, first of all, I got this book. I dove right into it, and this is such an easy read, such a quick read, but there's a lot here. I mean, there's a lot to this book, and it says something because I get a lot of books that cross my desk, and some of them are hard to digest. And I think it's easy to say that with paranormal books that have to do with science, sometimes, and especially I think for the layman who's trying to learn investigating, it's hard to wrap your head when it comes to science. A lot of our listeners will say, but we want to know more about the scientific side of investigating. And the minute you throw science out there, it's kind of, and you lose them. The eyes glaze over, and it's hard to wrap around. But you guys have really written a book here that is easy to digest. And first of all, I want to compliment you on that. And second, I would like to ask the question, why this book and why now?
Yeah, I mean, Brandon and I really hit it off when we first started testing for ghost hunters, and when we got on the show, and we really admired one another's investigative procedures and protocols, like the way we go about things. So we both had, I think a lot of people, most of the times, they kind of like bond over their frustrations over certain things that they care about so much. So there was a lot of misinformation and just like a lot of investigative practices that we didn't agree with. And I don't even think it's like agree with, but we saw the flaws in a lot of them. So we both had ideas for books. I was kind of chronicling a lot of the cases that we were on the show. And then Brandon had introduced this idea of a classification system to me that was absolutely, I thought, brilliant, very groundbreaking. So we said, okay, what if we compiled the entertainment aspect of the spookiness of ghost hunting and haunts and locations that appeals to so many people? And it's like why so many people watch a lot of paranormal shows and why they like going on investigations, because just because you're doing research doesn't mean it can't be fun, but then also combining that with sound investigative protocols and practices. And I think that at the risk of sounding like a real arrogant prick, I think that something like this is really needed. I don't really recall seeing anything recently that really hones in on like empirical kind of studies or the call for that, and new finds or breakthroughs in the paranormal field when it comes to like empirical studies and stuff like that. So how can we document things in a real quantifiable way that shows that no, when stuff is happening, these are the factors that are affected, and what are the possible correlations between them? And then how can other paranormal investigators really take our work to that next level? Let's implement this. Let's work with pressure. Let's see what happens. So it's really not, at the risk of sounding like very, very self-important, it's kind of like almost like a call to action in a way, like, hey, do this. This is what we found. We really hope that you guys can add to this. And that's where I think the real impetus of the book came from.
Brandon, I'm going to take something Mustafa said, and I'm going to throw it your direction. And don't take this the wrong way, my friend, but someone may ask in the field, well, why is it up to you two guys to make this classification system, and why should we stick to what you say?
Right. Well, no one else has done it. So I'll start there. I started looking at case logs going back to 1895 with the Ghost Club of London, other major researchers over the years that use specific terminology. There was, this terminology that was kind of scattered throughout the field going back hundreds of years. But there's never really been one kind of database or system for that. It's always, you go into a location, is it haunted? Is it residual? Is it intelligent? That's kind of the gist of it. So we wanted to take it a step further. And that actually was brought up to me by Dr. Harry Clore, my scientific mentor, a good friend of mine. He's one of the only people in history to receive 2 PhDs simultaneously in any discipline. And he always brought that up to me, that if we wanted to really take paranormal investigation to the next step, especially from a scientific perspective, we have to start to look at these things from, the idea of a classification system. You don't go to a zoo and say you saw a bunch of animals. You see tigers and lions and monkeys, things like that. So with the paranormal, if this phenomena is real and it's taking place and there's factual data and empirical evidence to back that up, we have to start to recognize what it is, what the mechanics are behind it, and what that really is, and how does that correlate with history. And that's what we've done. But we wanted to put it together because we think that it's the next step for the field, not only to step out of the shadow of pseudoscience, but to have a better understanding of what we're dealing with.
Before we get any further into the classification system or any further into the book, I want to delve a little bit into post-Ghost Hunters relationships and the relationship between the two of you. I find it interesting because after the A&E iteration of Ghost Hunters is over, the two of you have bonded and you've moved on, and you've moved on as a team. And I kind of want to get the idea of the chemistry between the two of you and exactly how you've decided to move on and the similarities, because it really does come through in the book, the similarities between the two of you, and the chemistry between the two of you. It's not only implied, but it's there that there are different backgrounds, but similar backgrounds. Let's talk a little bit. Let's start first, Brandon. I want to ask you, what was it throughout the filming of the show and then after the show that you said to yourself, hey, not only is Mustafa a like mind, but also a guy I really want to move forward with in the field and a friend?
Yeah, I think the biggest, part of our relationship and us working together on Ghost Hunters and after Ghost Hunters is that we didn't just want to make a TV show. It wasn't just about being on TV. We didn't want to show up to the location and do what was asked of us and call it a day. We really wanted to, look at the research and have, use this big platform with Ghost Hunters to really get our ideas out there and talk about paranormal research from a logical perspective and from a more scientific perspective. So to me, I think that was the biggest thing, is that we were very like-minded in regards to, we never stopped working. Like once we were on the road with Ghost Hunters, it was all about the research. It was all about bettering, not only ourselves and our research, but the show itself. It wasn't just a job. It wasn't just going out there to, gain some social media followers and some recognition. It was a lot more than that. And that's what I was admired about Mustafa. And I think that that's where the chemistry really kicked off, is because we were always working constantly. Like there was never downtime for us. It was always about the case. It was always about the research. What can we do to try and find factual data and empirical evidence? What can we do to try to find a logical explanation for some of these things? And that never really stopped. And I think that, once we stopped shooting the show after the second season, we just, kept running with it. We just never stopped. We had other cases we were working, other ideas, this book in particular, and we wanted to really further that, because once you finish an investigation, that, that case really isn't finished. There's never really an end to it per se, because we don't have all the answers. So that's one thing I admire about Mustafa, and I think that's why we work so well together.
Mustafa, when was it that you realized that in investigation styles, especially, that you and Brandon were really of a like mind? You had your little differences and little idiosyncrasies, but when was it that you realized that you clicked with Brandon and that you were going to take this further than the series?
Yeah, I mean, investigation or any type of job is very, very personal to each individual. And I'm very fortunate to have on the East Coast a lot of friends and like-minded individuals who just not in the paranormal field, like a lot of like artists who are really, really very much about the work and finding that closeness in the work. And you can't really force having chemistry with an individual. Like, you know, you said that there's a chemistry between us, but I think that it was that. It's just like Brandon said, it's finding somebody in the work. And to go back to what I was saying about personal investment, what struck me about Brandon, we were filming at the Widow's Ranch in Calabasas, California, as part of a screen test for the show. And the way that casting process was for the show was, they brought on a bunch of investigators, and it was very clear which people were there to investigate and which people were there to trying to get on a TV show. And obviously we're all human beings and we all have these like delusions of grandeur. It's like, oh, I'm going to be on TV and I'm going to be able to launch like a wine brand or something off of this or whatever the hell people do with the reality show endorsements or, that kind of stuff, which is great. No harm, no foul if you want to do that. But I felt that there was an honesty, a personal honesty, if that makes any sense, in the way that Brandon was working. He wasn't pretending to be something that he wasn't. And if there was something that was personally challenging, even from the way a producer talked or a point that they brought up, Brandon was trying to make the situation work. He wasn't trying to ignore stuff and like make things like make himself seem great. He just wanted to make the situation work. And that's the way that a lot of my people that I admire in my group, that's how they work. And that's just something I've been trying to get to. And I try to get to on a daily basis all the time. So the moment I decided that I really liked Brandon was when they were pairing people up to go on camera together. Mike Nichols, executive producer of the show, is kind of like scanning the area. And me, I was very, very much concerned with not placating people, not trying to make friends with people on a superficial level. If we're meant to be friends, let's be friends because we're both trying to make the situation work. And I think Brandon kind of smelled that on me, and he was seeing that throughout the course of the screen testing, because it was like a competition. They had like 32 people there. They could have filmed that and put that on TV. Yeah, I think, and it would have been like really intriguing for folks. So as Mike Nichols is kind of scanning the room and exterior to find people to pair up, I kind of see Brandon kind of just like like out of my peripheral, like go next to me. So Nichols sees that and I was like, all right, cool, real recognize real, that's dope. So then we walked in and we just clicked, and it was literally instantaneous. And what I loved about Brandon is he didn't settle for that. It's just like, okay, cool, we have this chemistry, we like each other, there's this like mutual respect, but let's not just make it like, oh, buddy, this is so cool kind of thing and settle for that. There's no settlement. It's just like, all right, what the hell can we do to make each case great? What new experiments? Like Brandon was constantly bringing in experiments, and I'll toot his horn because he won't, but like all the stuff that you start seeing paranormal investigators use now, that's stuff Brandon introduced: ambisonic microphones, EDI pluses, the EMCCD camera. All of that was stuff that he fought really, really hard to get implemented in our investigations. And they were really groundbreaking for a lot of our research. So a good friend of mine who's like my personal mentor and coach, he always says things like, if something's working, right? Like so few things in life work. Like relationships don't work, friendships don't work, right. Things just don't work. That's why people flipped out when the Wright brothers were actually able to fly. We put a freaking man on the moon. It's like, if something works, you'd be a special kind of psychopath to turn your back on it. Yeah. And I don't ever want to be that kind of person. So we had something that was really great and we were working well. And I know he's of the like mind of just like, hey, let's keep the gravy train rolling. So it's about the research, it's about the work. And I'm very, very happy to have found somebody who's like that. And I probably talk to and text Brandon more than anybody in my life. We're constantly passing ideas and stuff back and forth. So yeah, I'm very, very fortunate.
Well, if Brandon won't toot his own horn, let's see if I can get him to do it a little bit. Brandon, there were some really groundbreaking experiments, like Mustafa said, you brought a lot of things to that show, and it sounds like you did have some difficulties in getting that stuff on the show. Let's talk about that for a quick second, because there were some things on A&E's Ghost Hunters that we had never seen before, and we've seen a lot of the same stuff on a lot of the same shows, and it seems like after that iteration of Ghost Hunters, it seemed like other shows had to step up their game, and that other technology was had to be introduced. I mean, let's face it. Let's call it what it is. Okay.
Yeah.
And you started to see other technology. I mean, the days of K2 meters were thrown out the window at that point.
Absolutely.
And the genius of the different experiments that were thrown out there were kind of, I mean, just mind-boggling. I mean, people would watch the show and go, well, I never thought of doing that. Tell me, are these things that you were doing with APRA before you even got on the show, and then you introduced it to the TV world? Or are these things that maybe you were sitting around on set with Mustafa and others, and you said, hey, why don't we try this? How was it a combination of the both? How did you come up with some of these things?
Yeah, it's a combination of the both, but a majority of those experiments and the theories behind them were something I was doing with APRA for many years, and specifically with Dr. Harry Clore. You know, he's an amazing consultant and an advisor. The guy's a brilliant scientist and someone that is an open-minded skeptic. I mean, a lot of times people use the term skeptic and they're technically non-believers. They're not skeptics, you know? So going to Dr. Clore and just, you know, talking about theory and talking about the different cases, he's always got something in his mind that can help when it comes to, you know, furthering the scientific aspect of the paranormal. But specifically, you know, with what we, you know, now call the paranormal photon theory, and, you know, implementing this EMCCD camera, the electron multiplying camera, and now seeing this amazing correlation with photon events and pressure changes within these supposedly haunted locations, and having, you know, data to back that up has been something that's been unbelievable. And I hope more teams and more shows take that theory and expand upon it, because I think we're really onto something now. When you start to see the manifestation of photon events and, you know, pressure events happening at the same time, it's unbelievable. You know, we're really onto something, especially when you start to talk about black hole theory and quantum physics and things like that. You can really go down the rabbit hole with that. But, you know, again, I was doing a lot of this stuff with APRA in the past, but also, you know, sitting down with Mustafa and just talking about different theories and how we can go about tackling that in the field and documenting the different ideas that we had. So it was really a combination of both, but it was very exciting and something that we continue to work on. And we're really looking forward to doing more here in 2022. That's
awesome. Let's do this. We're going to take our quick break here because we got a lot to dive into. I want to get into the book, The Elements of a Haunting. And folks, what's interesting, and I want to point this out right now, and I'm glad you put this in the book, even though on a show I appeared on, Paranormal Night Shift, it had under my name, which I still shake my head. I wish they would have never put it on there. It said Paranormal Expert. And I cringe when I see that. There is no such thing as a paranormal expert. It appears in this book. That phrase appears in this book, and I'm glad you put that in there. We're going to go and talk about the classification system in there. And I'm glad you wrote this from, can I say, a humble side of the paranormal. You not only put this, when people say we've come up with a classification system, I think people think you might have just put it out there and said, this is the gospel truth. Go out and in my name, rename everything. And it's the gospel according to Brandon and Mustafa. And it's not. It's actually, when you read this, it really makes a ton of sense. And again, it's backed up. What I love about the book, and I'm just going to sing your praises here before we go to break. What I love about the book is that you take this classification system, you put it out there, and then you back it up with different cases, an example of cases that the two of you have been on, and it goes out very logically. So you put the classification system out there first, And then you'll put a case out there and you'll give an example of that classification. And we'll go through the classification system when we come back from break, let you know what that classification system is and the example of how, what kind of phenomena fits that classification system. And we'll go from there. We'll let you know more about that when we come back from break. And folks, there's a description in the description of the show today. There's a link for the book, and I highly suggest you go get the book. Again, if you're just a paranormal hobbyist, if you're a team out there that is an investigation team, and you're looking for a new way of investigating, and I'm telling you, this is the way you really should be investigating. We'll talk about it when we come back from break, about how you should be setting up for these investigations. We'll go through that when we come back as well. This book is it. If you want a go-to as to how you should be setting up your baselines and before you even start your investigation, this is pretty much, I hate to use it's a sacrilegious term. This is a Bible for how you should set up your investigations and go forward and do your investigations. It really, all of it is just, if there's such a thing, a common sense of paranormal investigation. When we come back, we'll talk more about the book, Elements of a Haunting. Brandon, Alvis, and Mustafa Gotallari are our guests, and we'll talk more about the Elements of a Haunting coming up next here on the Best in Paranormal Podcasting. This is Darkness Radio. Welcome back to the Best in Paranormal Podcasting. This is Darkness Radio. I'm Tim Dennis. My guests are Brandon Alvis and Mustafa Gotallari. We're talking about their brand new book, Elements of a Haunting, connecting history with science to uncover the greatest ghost stories ever told. Fellas, I'll tell you, I've said it before in this program. This is not only a great read, it's a quick read. Despite the fact that it's 264 pages. I mean, there's a lot of stuff in here. And it is, if you are anything from a paranormal enthusiast to an investigator to a hobbyist to someone who aspires to be on television, this is pretty much your go-to book. As far as I'm concerned, this is the book that you want to reference when it comes to doing things the right way, an investigation. Let's start, first of all, with just the basic science of things and setting up and what kind of equipment you want to use. I want to start with that first. And really, in the second chapter, you guys start to establish that. Now, I think most investigators think, I got a recorder, I'm good. I'll use my eyes, I'm good. Tell me, first of all, and I'll start with Brandon, why is it just maybe if I have a like a EMF detector in a recorder in my eyes, what am I missing?
Tim, you brought it up, you said it well earlier, there are no experts in the field in any way, shape, or form. There's technically no right or wrong way to do or conduct research. But if we want to step out of the shadow of pseudoscience and really be taken seriously, not only by the public, but the scientific community, we have to really, adopt a set of ethics standards and protocol, that will really help us step out of the shadow of pseudoscience. But, first and foremost, we personally never use devices that are made for paranormal research, devices that are, made to detect a ghost, if you will. We want to use different, devices and technology from various technical industries that can give us factual data and empirical evidence that can be tested by a third party. So we know what's something that's natural or something we can explain. So first and foremost, using devices like the Zoom ambisonic microphone is a great example. That's a device typically used by, the television and motion picture industry for VR. Mm-hmm. And what's really cool about that is there's so many different people out there that use these devices on a daily basis within their work that you can consult these people and they can really tell you if it's an artifact within the recording, something that they can explain very easily, or if it's something that, they can't explain. And that helps a lot. The EDI Plus is a great example. all the different sensor technology within that device with all the environmental conditions and readings that it'll give you, from temperature to humidity, pressure, EMF, vibration, things like that. But first and foremost, I think that using devices that aren't specifically made for paranormal research really takes us to that next step and really helps us not, by not chasing our own tail and really believing in false positives, because those devices are just riddled with, false positives, riddled with, technology that's giving you false information to try and glorify the situation by, I guess, feeling like you're communicating with an entity or a spirit.
For someone who's never used an ambisonic microphone before, what are we using it for? And what just explain to them what exactly they're looking for with an ambisonic microphone.
Well, with the ambisonic microphone, we're looking for electronic voice phenomena, EVP. But what's really great about the ambisonic is it gives you 360 degrees of audio. So not only is it a very high bit rate quality recording that'll give you a lot of information and data within those recordings, but it also gives you that 360 degree audible view where you can really tell where the voice is coming from. So instead of having, a mono or stereo track, you can really hear within a room exactly where that voice was generating from. And if you correlate that with your video equipment and you can see where everyone is at any given point in time, and that's all on a time code, you can really tell if there was someone in that area or not. So it really helps you cut down on false positives.
So if someone is in the corner of the room and they accidentally let out a peep, it was them. There you
exactly.
Go. There
exactly.
So also in there, I think people also underestimate the fact that a good infrared camera can really do something. I think they think night vision is just fine because they see a lot of night vision on television. I think also it's understated how good an infrared camera really can be. Speak to me about how important infrared is in your investigation.
Yeah, I think it's just a good rule of thumb to try and have as much of a variegated approach through any type of evidence that you're trying to document at a location. There have been instances where Brandon and I have captured some really anomalous stuff using an IR camera. We're at Madison Seminary. We didn't even realize it in the moment when we capture what appears to be what looks like a shorter person walking on this balcony to nowhere. They're outside. We're on the second floor, and you see someone walk across, and that was captured on an infrared camera. I know when Brandon was investigating with Brian in Colorado, Steamboat Springs at the Perry Mansfield camp. Again, there's this weird anomalous thing that was captured on the IR camera in the theater over there, in the larger theater that was over there. And we've been finding that with cameras, like even the body camera that Daryl was wearing when we were in Haines, Alaska at the Halsey Hotel, we captured a full body apparition, shadow person staring, looking, going once, twice, and then kind of like almost scurrying off the camera lens away from us. So I think by implementing these different pieces of technology in an ideal world, you'd kind of have like a full spectrum thing, right? You'd have EMCCD to detect photon events. If that's how the entity is manifesting, like we say, there's no experts in this field. We don't know how, ghosts or entities or whatever it is that's manifesting in a particular environment is going to manifest, or how we're going to be able to capture it. So if you have IR, if you have EMCCD, if you have cameras with different, frame rates or whatever that is, or different types of lenses, then we can start to narrow that down, and then we start to factor in other environmental conditions. What's the pressure like? What's the moon phase like? What's the climate like? Was there precipitation going on? Then we can start to really narrow it down. That's why data, as boring as it sounds, and people don't want to sift through all that, that's the stuff that you need to do. And that's in any vocation. That's in any field. It's not just going to be like, let me walk into a place and who is the guy that, got murdered, or the, person who was groped by somebody, and let's talk about that. And then all of a sudden you're going to start getting in a fist fight with a ghost or whatever. It's not going to be that. Kobe Bryant didn't, score 81 points in a game because he just had it. He shot 500 to 1,000 shots a day, meticulously grinding. Great actors don't give great performances in movies. It's like hundreds of takes sometimes if you're on a freaking Fincher film, and then you get to that truth of what you're trying to do. So that's where like an infrared camera is about as valuable as an ambisonic, is about as valuable as a barometer, you know, whatever works for that investigation. So you need to have that full spectrum approach.
There's a tool out there that you guys refer to as a Swiss Army knife of all paranormal equipment, and it's a data logger. Mustafa, let's get your take on the data logger and why it is so important, and why people should really, if they're going to go out there and do investigations, especially on a regular basis, why they should have it.
It's Brandon introduced that for the first time when we were at the Pillars estate, and it basically just detects a litany of different environmental conditions, and it logs them, and it lets us know, okay, this is the baseline of humidity, this is the baseline of the barometric pressure in the room, this is the baseline of EMF and temperature. So if anomalous things start going on, we then get to see that there is a huge punctuated shift, whether a decrease or increase in the moment, and then we can see that graphed on a line. You don't necessarily have to buy an EDI Plus, but it's just so convenient because you have all of those things in one single device, and it graphs it all for you. So then you can then compare those graphs with one another and like overlay them by using any type of analytics app. I mean, the one that it comes with, I think it's called like weghosthunt.com, and you can put that in there online, and you can load those data points, you save it onto an SD card. But that's why it's so important, because yeah, you could get real-time confirmation, and we've been lucky enough to have that, where it seems like there's intelligent responses coming in, and there's an entity there that's interacting with the device, and we invite it to interact with the device. But that doesn't necessarily mean that, you're going to use a data logger to talk to ghosts. We used it for residual activity. We were in Willimantic, Connecticut, and people had these reports of footsteps going down the stairs, and it was a pretty frustrating investigation for us, because we're like trying to figure out how there's something going on in this house, we don't know how to do it. And Brandon goes and has a think, and then he comes back in and he's like, all right, I got an idea. Take 3 of the data loggers, put them on the stairwell, and then just like the reports are, people walking down the stairs, pressure change, pressure change, pressure change, like in the same cadence of somebody walking down the stairs. So then we can then draw our own conclusions of what happens. And plus it's there, it's in hard evidence. It's like, okay, fine. If you don't believe that there's anything going on here, why is there punctuated environmental changes happening at these specific intervals or at these specific times? And we have the evidence to back it up. So that's why it's such a great tool.
And that data logger is really giving you your baseline as far as where conditions are on a normal basis. And then, of course, as you pointed out, you're getting your fluctuations, and you can match that up with whatever phenomena you're having, or supposed phenomena, we should say, you're having, because then you have to back it up with other tools.
Precisely.
Okay, great. Of course, we all know about FLIR cameras and what they bring to the table. Brandon, talk to me a little bit about the electron multiplying camera and how this came about, especially with photon phenomena in your investigation.
Yeah, the EMCCD camera is, a very sensitive scientific piece of equipment that's, typically used by the digital imaging scientific community to record single photon events. And photon events are light events that are not typically seen by the human eye. A lot of it in space exploration, using telescopes and things like that to study photons and how they work within the universe. But they do happen here on Earth as well. Photons are generated, all the time, but we really can't see them with our own eye, with our human eye. But, I was, again, another situation where I was talking to one of my scientific consultants and asking from their point of view, from their scientific expertise, if, these eyewitnesses are correct and they really are seeing these types of things, what would be the mechanics behind it? The possible mechanics. Obviously, no one knows. We have no idea. Mm-hmm. But going to someone that, has a degree in physics and chemistry and talking to them about it, the theory of photon events was thrown out at me. It's very possible that there are people out there that, can see photons with their naked eye and in certain situations. And it's possible that maybe it's a logical explanation to, said apparition sightings, or maybe there's more to it, that photons are part of the mechanics of what are manifestations or what are believed to be manifestations. So once that theory was thrown out at me, I was able to, acquire a camera from one of our engineers, one of our consultants. He sent out the EMCCD camera and we went out to test this theory, just following the scientific method, coming up with theory, hypothesis, and testing it. And we were very lucky to not only document some amazing, evidence and data, but it perfectly correlated with eyewitness testimony from some of the most credible eyewitnesses we've ever dealt with. And after 3 locations and 3 specific events that were recorded with the EMCCD camera, we have a solid theory now that we're still exploring and hoping to, dig further into. But the paranormal photon theory, it seems like there's definitely something to it. And I think that there's a long way to go and a lot more research to conduct, but I definitely think we're onto something.
I would ask you this. I know you both have run into, and there's a case in the book where there's a photon phenomena in there. And I'm curious to know if you guys think that ball lightning would perhaps fall into that as well. Mustafa, do you believe that ball lightning is a photon phenomena?
I don't know. I mean, I'm not. All I know is like when we use the EMCCD camera and we're detecting these changes, there's an energy source associated, with them. Mm-hmm. They all have an energy source, and the only way we could really replicate it is by striking a match in front of the camera, and that produces an energy source in front of it. So yeah, I mean, if there's some type of electromagnetic charge that's going through the air, then it would show up on that. It would show up on the EMCCD camera. So yeah, theoretically, I don't see why it wouldn't show up on there. It's got an energy source, produces light. So yeah, that sensor is very sensitive to picking that up. Okay,
let's move on to your classification system. I found this incredibly fascinating in that we've never really had a system in which we can identify what's what. I mean, we throw out very willy-nilly. That's got to be a ghost. That's got to be a demon. This has got to be this. This has got to be that based on what we're running into. And we don't really know what we're running into. We have an experience or what we think is an experience. To us, it's if it makes lights move and if it does something to us or if it doesn't do something to us or if it makes us feel weird, well, it's got to be something. If we checked a few factors and we think it's not a false positive, then we think. It's just we think and we feel, and therefore we know. Both of you have come up with more than just we think and we feel and we think we know. And this is quite interesting when you get down to it. First, I want to ask, and I'll throw this at Brandon, how is it that you narrow down from we think, we feel, we know to this is how we get to the actual, we're going to narrow this down to different sections of this is the actual entity and this is how they get classified? How did you break down into individual categories?
Well, it all really came together once, I went back and looked at different case logs going back a couple hundred years and the terminology associated with that. I mean, in the late stages of the Victorian era, they were very serious about spiritualism and, specifically ghost hunting, where not only were they, conducting seances and doing the spiritualist thing, but they were actually actively going out to said haunted locations throughout Europe and some in the United States as well, and conducting investigations just as we do today, but with the Victorian era of technology, which is a lot different. But I started to notice reading those papers and, really reading about some of these literary giants that went out there and people you never would have guessed investigating the paranormal, Charles Dickens, Irvin Washington, people like that were actively out there looking for this type of phenomena. They had a really great understanding of the history associated with these places. And they had a really beautiful way of kind of telling those stories of these people that once lived and died in these locations and what correlated with, what they believed to be a haunting. And I looked at that and I started to think, obviously history plays a big role in our research. I mean, it's one of the, biggest foundations for what we're doing. And I think that history and then the science aspect of it, the data, that we're collecting, has to go hand in hand. And that's where the classification kind of came into play. Was history is one of the most important aspects of the research. Each location we go to has a different type of history that seems very similar, seems to have, an element to it or a formula that these are the type of, events that take place that lead to a haunting. And, going back and looking through the terminology and looking at the different case logs and seeing that correlation between these historical events throughout the world really was the foundation and really was the basis. And that's really what set that classification system in motion and, really helped us understand that connecting history with the science is really what helps us understand the different types of hauntings and the phenomena.
So there's 5 classes here, according to the classification system. Class 1 is haunting apparitions. And so you've got your emotional attachment, which is a spirit that is attached to a location or object, correct?
Correct, yes.
And then you've got your gray ladies, which is the ghost of women who are said to have died violently for the sake of love or through the heartless actions of a family member or loved one. They appear gray, but they also appear white, black, or brown. And then the innocent ghost, traditionally the spirit of a woman who is seduced and then deserted by her lover, only to die in a consequence of the act. Would you say this is the most common that you've run across? And I'll go to Mustafa. Is that the most common that you run across in a haunting?
I don't know if it's the most common, but I can say that with Brandon and I would say the cases where we had what we thought was the most kind of intelligent back and forth communication, where, every ghost hunter's dream or investigator's dream is to kind of get that immediate feedback, because it's instantly like gratifying. Like that's as morbid as that sounds. That was the case with, those instances that happened with, at the Athenaeum with Dr. Helene Kanabe. It happened at the Worley Hospital in Pampa, Texas, with Mary. So I would say that in those instances, that's theoretically what happened, and there's some evidence to suggest that. But I don't know. I mean, again, going back to what we said, there's no experts in this field. Mm-hmm. So I couldn't really say that. I feel like a lot of times we actually capture a lot of residual activity, more often than not. It doesn't really seem like there's necessarily a correlation. We just happen to be in the right place at the right time. But those 2 examples definitely stand out in my mind the most, just because it's such a rush to be able to go in there and, seem like you're communicating with someone.
With the, and I'll throw this at Brandon, with the haunting apparitions, do you feel like those haunting apparitions have, I guess you could say, anything to really communicate to you other than a need or a want to tell their story, or is it just, and is it more of a residual or an active haunting?
It can be a mixture of both sometimes. That's what's so mind-boggling about all of it. But I definitely think there's always a need to tell a story, or need to finish that story, or tell a bit of information that was never revealed. For instance, with Dr. Kanabe at the Athenaeum, that was a perfect example of a gray lady haunting. I mean, to the T. I mean, you read about some of these cases, in Europe, about castles and women that were killed for the sake of love in these places that appear as these gray ladies. Or if you think about that famous ghost photo, the Brown Lady of Raynham Hall, you know what I mean? It's a great example of that specific classification. But once we started reading about this story of Dr. Kanabe and actually having this interaction with pressure changes within the Athenaeum, and that's a moment, it's an aha moment where you're like, oh my God, this is a perfect example, a perfect correlation of this gray lady phenomenon, this specific classification, where the history lines up perfectly. There's definitely a message being told. I think that's, to answer your question, Tim, there, I think there's always a message with that specific class that they're trying to relay that message. I don't know if it's, for their own sake to maybe move on possibly, or there's just information that isn't quite correct on the record. I'm not sure, but with Dr. Kanabe, it seemed that we had direct communication with her, and, that specific classification and that history, that tragic death that she, experienced, she's, sticking around the Athenaeum for a reason. I hope one day we can get back there and, get some more information about it.
Okay. Class 2 is a helping entity, a familiar apparition or a haunting, a ghostly apparition said to be associated with a particular family. It could be a guilt-ridden entity, a spirit that can haunt a location because of a previous act in life that they cannot forget, or a crisis apparition, a spirit that's tied to a location where they passed that is trying to reveal a message about their life or death. This to me seems like an entity that we run across quite often when we're investigating a sanitarium or a jail, or more of an institution than anything else. And I would tend to think that that's one that we mainly see more like on television than anything else. Would you tend to agree? I mean, we'll start with Mustafa on this one. Would this be one that you've run into quite often as well?
With regards to like families or setting the record straight or anything like that, I think sometimes it's always just maybe an acknowledgement. I mean, I know Brandon, he's told me about cases that he's done with APRA, where a lot of family members, a long line of family members have lived, eat, breathed, and died in that same location. And I was at a place out near Kansas City, Missouri, called the Bingham Wagoner Estate. No real dark history associated with the place. Nobody was murdered with a candelabra or anything. Mm-hmm. But there was just a really great, loving family. And we had some incredible activity there. So I don't know necessarily if it's associated. I think for TV purposes, yes, there's a certain kind of macabre sexiness, for the lack of a better term, associated with like mental institutions, sanitariums, hospitals where people are dying of tuberculosis or anything like that. But I think it can also extend to, in my experience, homes that have that rich, deeply rooted familial history. And if theoretically there are entities who have control of how they manifest and where they want to stay, they're going to want to stay in a place that they have a deep connection to. So I think for me, it kind of correlates more to that kind of historical lineage than anything.
Okay. Brandon, with that, just kind of wrapping up that classification with the helping entities, have you ever run across in your rich history of investigating, have you ever found that with the familial apparitions and the hauntings that you've found a case where something miraculous, for lack of a better term, has been discovered, where you get a family that goes, hey, you know what? We've been looking for this lost treasure. We've been looking for this money that's been missing, or we've found just something good out of this.
Right. Yeah. I personally have not experienced that, but I have heard of instances where that's happened. I think the Oliver House is one that I think Grant was telling me about not too long ago, where like they actually found, items that were hidden because of the entities in the house, I guess, directing them towards that area. And they actually found items that were buried or in the walls. I can't remember exactly, but at the Glen House in Cape Girardeau, Missouri is a great example of, a familial haunting. And, when we were there was actually a moment where we found old, like 1800s coins just laying on the ground that were not part of the museum's collection, that really came out of nowhere. It wasn't on the show, didn't make air because it seemed too fantastical. You know what I mean? It just seemed so out of nowhere. But, the crazy part about the history and the correlation with that was that the Glenn family owned a bank. And it was kind of the downfall of their family where, once the bank closed and they lost it, they kind of lost everything. And I think there was a message trying to be sent there in particular. But not only did we find this antique 1800s coin, on the threshold of the doorway, we also found another antique coin right in the living room. It was very strange where they came from. It definitely to me seemed like someone planted it, like it was a trick. But when I spoke to Christy, the president of the museum there, she I mean, she had this look on her face. She was genuinely terrified of what was going on in the location, and you could tell it was not her. And obviously, no one in the crew is walking around with antique coins like that in their pockets. You just don't find those in everyday locations. You have to go to a coin dealer and purchase those, and they're not cheap. So that was really interesting to me. And that also correlated perfectly with a story that Christy told us about. Like Missouri University is there, and they have board meetings within the Glenn House. And these are very logical people that work for an institution. They once walked into the exact area where we found one of the coins, and they said that coins were just dropping out of thin air onto the ground, which was a wild story. And I mean, if that would have came from anyone else besides these people that are, very credible people, I probably wouldn't believe it because it sounds like a scene out of Poltergeist.
Right.
But I don't know, man. Like it just seems like there's something to it. But again, I think there was a message associated with that event that unfortunately we were not able to unfold that.
That's crazy. That's a crazy apportation story, I tell you. Yeah. And that would be a crazy prank to play, to purchase a bunch of 1800s coins if you were that rich and just start planting them all over the place just to throw people off.
I wouldn't even be mad. I wouldn't even be mad at that point. I'd be like, they went all in. Like,
yeah.
Like you did it.
Like the little pat on the back. Congratulations, you got us. I don't know how many thousands of dollars you're out, but congratulations anyways. Class 3, restless spirits. When a person suffers a traumatic, sudden death, leaving them with unfinished business that can create a restless spirit. The classification here, bound by loved ones, a spirit that remains to stay with a loved one or is looking for a loved one. Suicide apparition, the spirit of someone that has taken their own life and regrets the act. And a murdered apparition, the spirit of a person that was murdered by the hand of another. This by far is the toughest, I think, of all the classifications, is the restless spirit. I know it's pointed out in the book that both of you have close loved ones that committed suicide, and that you've both been touched by suicide. I have loved ones that have taken their own lives as well. This is a particularly painful subject. And I know that you have to go into this haunting with a great deal of care. And I really did appreciate, and before we go any further with this one, I really do appreciate the care in which you tackle this subject in this book, and how you deal with it when you're investigating. When when it comes to suicide and suicides in general. I know, and I have seen in other investigations on television, there's not a lot of care when it comes to that. And I've even seen some things that are a little cringeworthy when it comes to investigators and suicide. And it's a shame. It really shouldn't be handled that way. But Mustafa, let's start with you. Talk to me a little bit about when you're dealing with a restless spirit case. And let's start first of all with either a murdered apparition or a suicide apparition. When you know you're dealing with something that sensitive, and you have to go in and you have to start to communicate, what is your first instinct? How do you want to reach across to that other side? Because you are dealing with a human soul. What is your first instinct when you want to reach across to that person and make communication?
You have to handle it, for me, the same way you would when talking about it with another person, a living individual. It's not something that you can instantly sympathize with, even though, we might have had experiences with suicide or depression or whatever that is you have to approach it from a place of first acknowledging, hey, I don't necessarily, I probably, and within yourself, you don't even need to really vocalize it, because you can feel when someone's just trying to kind of bypass the elephant in the room.
Yeah.
But the way to address that is to really, really, really have something worthwhile to say. paranormal investigating, especially for TV purposes, can feel almost exploitative at times. You know, you're exploiting the tragedy of a location, you're exploiting the tragedy of an individual for views and to get them to act like a dancing monkey. So I think, like, for me, a lot of times, and Brandon might be tired of me saying it all the time when we investigate together, but I'll address that head on. I'll be like, I know this is what this feels like. I know this is not lost on me. It feels like, you know, we're trying to get you to do things for us on command. And I can't understand what you're going through, but this is why we're here. We want to document your presence because this is our work. We feel passionately about it. And this is, and if you have anything that you'd like to say, here is your open forum. And we would love, love, love for the opportunity to speak with you. And I think just trying, you don't have to mean it, I don't think, because I don't think 99% of the time when we say or do anything, we mean it all the time. Mm-hmm. But I think at least acknowledging that within yourself and conducting yourself in a respectful manner, understanding the culture of the location, the culture of the time period and the investigation, and really, really struggling to do that with somebody, that's the best way to go about it. You know, I think about it, even I was like, I'm on the road and we're going to places where people have never met anybody named Mustafa before.
Right.
And, you know, I'm sitting in like on a bar in Idaho and I'm talking to somebody and the guy's like, oh, is it okay if I do this? Can I ask you this like question? And it's the same thing when you're kind of encountering the unknown with an individual. You can see when someone's trying.
Yeah.
And I think when you're really fighting to care, not as a given that you care, that's when we get the best responses. So it's a real psychological / heartfelt thing that you're working with there. And that's what I tell people all the time is you really have to be honest with yourself when you go in an investigation and really try to put your best foot forward. And you have to hit that honesty at the top of it.
Let me ask you this, Mustafa. Is it, and I'm going to use this only in the context of a spirit that has committed suicide. Is it out of bounds in your book to ask that spirit, do you know that you were loved and missed? And that we're here to try and, I guess for lack of a better term, we're here to document your story and to try and let people know that you're okay.
I don't know. What I do know is that when Brandon and they only showed a few minutes of this in the Worley Hospital episode, but that interaction that we had on the motion detector and the EDI started with the EDI plus, went to another EDI plus when we asked it to go upstairs, and then it came back down to us and was done through a motion detector, and we have an amazing EVP associated with that. I do know that lasted for about 25 or 26 minutes,
at least.
Yeah, at least. The second we started talking about the suicide, mm-hmm. communication stopped. And then it felt like the energy changed in the room. And then we started getting, after about 2 minutes or 3 minutes or so, we started getting other interactions, and it felt like there was somebody else there mm-hmm. communicating with us. And it got pretty dark and pretty creepy really quick. That didn't go into the show because it's just, how do you frame an episode around that? Right. It's just too much of a weird turn. But I don't know. I don't know if it's wise to bring it up. I think you have to kind of feel the situation out. And I just don't know if there's any platitudes. I think the very act of trying to communicate with somebody and giving them a chance to talk and just hear them out kind of says what you said. I don't think you really need to say that. I don't think they need to hear it. Me personally, I wouldn't want to hear it. You know what I mean? I know what I did.
Yeah. Yeah.
Treat me like a person and, have a conversation with me. That's an actionable thing instead of just saying oh, you're missed or, oh, people love you or anything like that. I don't think that necessarily needs to be said. But I think it depends on situation by situation.
Okay.
It's all situational.
When it comes to, and I'll bring this up to you, Brandon, when it comes to somebody being bound by a loved one, someone who feels like they have to watch over the people that are still remaining there, Is it something where, we always feel like we have the power to release somebody to go to the other side? We could sit and debate all day long about what that other side is. Is it a quantum pocket or a quantum universe that we release people to? And we are going to get to that here in this episode, because there's something in this book that absolutely terrified me when I read it. Or are we fooling ourselves that we have more power than we actually have when it comes to this spirit, this bound by a loved one? Are we thinking that we're more omnipotent than we really are?
Yeah, Mustafa and I talk about that frequently, actually, regularly. We talk about the fact that you hear a lot of people talking about, cleansing areas and crossing spirits over and things like that. I think that's just, it's possible it could happen, right? I don't want to say it's not possible, because anything's possible. But, I think when people give themselves that kind of power and they believe that they can do these almost godly like things, it's kind of dangerous in a situation like that, in a sense. But, with bound by loved ones, I think that's, kind of a pretty common thing with homeowner cases, with families that may have had, an aunt or a grandmother or a grandfather who have died in that house, and they start to have a little bit of activity, and they kind of quite never go there, that it could be, possibly their family member. But a lot of times with those familial connections and being bound by a loved one, sometimes people don't, make that transition, whatever that transition may be. They want to stick around and see what happens to their family. They want to be around for those moments. And how that works, we're not quite sure. But, from a sense of love and a sense of, familial connection, I think that's kind of happens more often than not. And again, with these classifications, the different classes can kind of cross together, where you can have multiple categories that are, cross, classified. So for instance, like with the Worley Hospital, you have a guilt-ridden entity that is a suicide apparition, because not only, did Mary Lucille Myers, unfortunately take her life in the Worley Hospital, but she definitely, seems to have some guilt associated with that, beyond, just the act of what she did to take her own life. So, but again, I think that sometimes, with certain people, I think that with paranormal investigation and the different, ideologies associated with that, sometimes we can get into paralarping and people thinking they have magical powers and having these powers that are, not really happening, and I say that from a logical point of view. Again, I don't know if people can cross entities or not. I don't really know, but I think it's almost a power trip in a way.
Yeah. The one thing all three of these have in common, the ones that are bound by loved ones, suicide apparition and murdered apparition, is they all seem to be seeking a resolution. And when that resolution is found, the spirits seem to stop haunting. Is that safe to say?
Yeah. Again, I think that, if we think about, ghosts and hauntings from a religious context, or you think about free will, right, from a Christian point of view or whatever, I'm not sure how any of this works. Again, we don't know, but to me, it makes more logical sense that these entities are the ones that have to make that decision, right? So if they find that resolution, they find some kind of closure, I think they move on. And whatever that movement is, that transition, and we don't really quite know, but it's their choice. It doesn't take someone coming into a location and, waving around sage and, reciting prayers or whatever it may be to make them or banish them or make them leave. I think that's a personal decision. And I think that if we're talking about consciousness retained after death, that choice is still there.
Yeah. Class 4 is malevolent entities, everybody's favorite. It's a spirit that is intent on inflicting harm to others. They also include green ladies, or phantom apparition of ladies dressed in green gowns that often act as heralds or misfortune of death. A hag, which is an apparition that reported to resemble an ugly old woman with tangled hair, rotting teeth, a hooked nose, mad eyes, or claw-like fingers. The hag is also related to the Mara, from which the word nightmare or Mara is derived, a demon that likes to attack and abuse humans at night. Or radiant boys, ghosts of boys who have been murdered. They are believed to be an omen of bad luck or death. Malevolent entities, I think anybody who's been investigating could say they've been scratched, that they've been had their hair pulled. Would you put that into a malevolent entity a class 4 classification?
Sometimes I think that, being scratched or having your hair pulled or your arm tugged, things like that may not be an act of, malevolence. It might be just a way for them trying to get your attention. It's just a bit too much. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's always hard to say if that specific act was meant to be, violent or is meant to scare you. So it's always tough. But I know Mustafa had an interesting interaction at, the Glen House in Cape Girardeau, which we were talking about earlier, where he was actually scratched. And I think that, again, the feeling that comes along with that act, I think, says a lot more than just having the scratch.
Well, I think you play that down a little bit, Mustafa. It was more than just a scratch. I mean, there's a scratch. Like I've had like little scratches on my hand and stuff like that. But Mustafa got the granddaddy of them all when he got scratched, right, Mustafa?
Yeah, it was all down my arm, and then I have to be honest. Like I would always hear like stories about people getting scratched and stuff, and see it on other shows, and I always every single time just roll my eyes and just be like, they're just full of freaking crap. Like there's no way that happened. There's no way people get scratched. But it felt like an electrical burn down my arm. And then when I went back to the hotel and I was getting changed at the end of the night because it was sweaty in Missouri, I was just sweating everything up. And I go and I see down my back in the mirror, it's a scratch all the way down there. And my first thing is like, I wanted to send a photo to my wife, but then I didn't want her to be like, well, who are you hanging out with?
Yeah, right.
Missouri, what are you doing? What are you into out there? Ghost Hunters is changing you, which is a great time. But but that was I was more kind of intrigued and excited about it, and also in disbelief that's like, holy crap, like it happened to me, and it actually happened. So, did it feel malevolent at the time? No, I felt pretty guilty about it just because I knew the Glenn family's history and how much that house might have probably meant to them. My family, we lost our house when we were really young, and it's something that bothers me. I'm 35 going on 36, and it's still something that really, really, freaks me out. And, my house just recently got flooded and I'm getting that rebuilt, and it's something that just kind of like haunts me. For the lack of a better word. And I felt guilty by like bringing that up. Almost, I felt like I was antagonizing whoever was there. So yeah, I don't think it was like a malevolent thing. I think it was more just like, hey, you effort, like, what this feels like why are you bringing it up in this way?
Yeah.
Like, I felt like I deserved it. Maybe I'm a masochist. I don't know.
I don't know that you deserve that, my friend. I wouldn't go that far. That's
It's my truth. I can say what I want.
I guess you can, but I'd stop short of saying that. That's for sure. Class 5 pseudo hauntings. This class is designated for unknown haunting groups. It can include elementals, manifestations of the 4 elements: water, air, fire, and earth. Elementals are usually associated with the practice of magic. I do want to bring something up here, and I'm going to address both of you on this when it comes to pseudo hauntings. It is kind of a vague category, and here's where we're going to get a little controversial. As far as pseudo hauntings go, Mustafa, you're Muslim. I don't presume to know what religion Brandon is. I myself, I used to be a practicing Catholic, but we all become failed Catholics at one time or another. There's no designation for a demon or a jinn or anything like that. I take it falls under pseudo hauntings. But you specifically stayed away, and there's no shadow people piled in here or anything like that. But you specifically stay away from that under pseudo hauntings. And I guess I want to know why. And I see Mustafa kind of looking at me like, are you chomping at the bit to get in on this one?
A little bit.
Okay.
I think it, again, like you said, it's kind of controversial, but I'll talk about it. Once a lot of my close Muslim friends, when they found out I was a paranormal investigator, and it's something I kind of kept on the DL just because I just didn't want to hear it from people.
Yep.
You know, I'd much rather be caught watching like, you know, adult films in my bedroom at one point than being, you know, telling people that I'm a ghost hunter and, you know, and I have to sit there and explain it.
Right.
But once they found that out, everyone had like a gin story or everybody had something like that to talk about. And, you know, if you read the book, I kind of talk about my family's own experiences with that extensively. And I just feel like it's really, really kind of arrogant to sit there and think that my belief system that existed for, you know, a 292-year period in a specific period of time is the end all be all of all explicable supernatural or experienced supernatural phenomena. Mm-hmm. So I didn't want to like go and throw that in there. But to speak a little bit on pseudo hauntings, I think a lot of it just kind of has to do with if hauntings are energies captured in a location, and if that is persisting over time, then if you have somebody who wants to believe something, and it's like hauntings a relationship, you know, if you're in a relationship with somebody and you want to start finding evidence for them cheating, or you want to start evidence for them mistreating you, even though in actuality, the reality is it's actually things are going pretty good, and maybe you're trying to sabotage it, or maybe you're trying to create some kind of narrative in your head so that you're blameless. I feel like a lot of these pseudo hauntings that we encounter are people who want to believe that a place is haunted. And this is what I encountered a lot in the start of my paranormal career when I would do like, you know, home cases and stuff, is that people are always trying to kind of absolve themselves of any type of responsibility for their own lives. So I feel like the pseudo hauntings, it's like that trapped energy of just repression and ignoring certain facets of a life get kind of, you know, created there somehow. I don't know. It's very, very amorphous, but that's what I've kind of seen in like these pseudo hauntings. Like weird stuff's going on, but it's kind of when this person's around and they just have this like kind of weird energy or this weird vibe. So that's the best that I can explain it like at this particular moment. But yeah, I didn't want to talk about gin or anything like that because I didn't want all my friends that I grew up with being like, what the hell, man? I told you that gin story in confidence. I'm like, hey, I'm sorry, bro. Like, I'm not going to bring that up.
Right on.
My own family, though, they can, you know, suck it. They, you know, hey, you had me, your family, you know, sorry, shouldn't have had me then.
Brandon, I take it you're following right along the same lines as Mustafa here. That you know, you just want to I don't want to say stay away from it, but you probably are wanting to stay on the science-based side of this.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, again, you know, everyone has their own different, you know, belief systems and their own, you know, ideologies and whatnot, but we wanted to correlate with, you know, historical records of specifically, you know, with paranormal investigation and see how those correlated with cases we worked and data we've collected. So we wanted to stay away from that. But with, you know, the pseudo haunting category, a lot of that's, you know, thought form manifestation, which is, I'm sure you've heard that terminology, Tim, you know about that, where people create. Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. You know, and I think there are a lot of different locations throughout the country, especially when it comes to paratourism, some of these privately owned haunted locations where thousands of people are going through these buildings at any given year and investigating these urban legends, these stories that really have no factual history behind them, that it kind of takes a life of its own. I think a perfect example would be, you know, the RMS Queen Mary with the story of Jackie.
Yes.
Right? Yep. There is no documented death of a drowning in the first class pool. There is no girl named Jackie that has died in the first class pool or on the ship. Yet it seems like this entity is manifesting itself somehow. I mean, there's so many different audio recordings, photos, video of it, of this child apparition. How does that happen? You know, I would say that perfectly falls within a pseudo haunting category where so many, you know, thousands upon thousands of people are going through this area and kind of, you know, projecting this little girl into this area, and it's kind of takes a life of its own. It's a very strange phenomena for sure. But again, with the classification system, we're looking to expand and grow upon it. So with the pseudo haunting category, we hope to have, you know, more terminology associated with it over the years. And we really hope that people read the book and think about their own research, go back in their own case logs and try and see if the classification system works with what they're doing. And hey, maybe we can expand upon it one day.
Absolutely. We're we're getting to the pretty close to the end of our time here. One of the things I wanted to bring up before we wrap up today is there's something in the book that absolutely kind of chills me when I read it, and it has to do with the theory of ghosts or time warps. Are ghosts actually what we're seeing, ghosts, or are we actually talking to an apparition from another time? And in there, we talk about the photon phenomena and pressure levels, barometric pressure levels. And you have a scenario in here, guys, that absolutely throws me. And you use the example of black holes. If I may, I want to read that from the book. And here's the example. So you say, so are we talking about time travel, or rather communicating with individuals through some type of time traveling cosmic telephone of sorts? It's a heady concept that's difficult to grasp, and we're only beginning to consider its implications ourselves. But there's some very intriguing studies about black holes that could help us to better understand that we've documented regarding photon events and pressure changes. Express UK published an article about black holes potentially holding the key to time travel. In the article, and I'm going to butcher the name here, researcher, is it Atharva? Can you help me with the last name here, Brandon? Is it Artharva?
Oh, wait, I'm going to butcher the hell out of it too. So.
Is it Palshetkar, I believe? Broke down a black hole's role in time travel as such. And here's the quote: "If someone was supposed to see you falling down a black hole, he would see you going slower and slower, taking weeks, years, and even decades until you reach a point where light can't escape the black hole's event horizon. The viewer then just sees a spaceship stuck at the event horizon until it gets redshifted and it gradually disappears. Meanwhile, while you enter the black hole, everything you see outside will begin to speed up outside. Your family, kids, grandkids, hundreds of generations will rise and fall in just a matter of minutes and hours. In short, our perception of time during these strange occurrences is altered." Okay, so as I'm sitting there and I'm reading this, and you're talking about Sir Roger Penrose being on the Joe Rogan Experience, I'm thinking to myself, what if ghosts are just time traveling spirits, and we're dealing with a time traveler, okay, and we're looking into a portal of sorts, and it's not really the apparition of a dead person, but it's somebody looking from the bottom of this black hole, so to speak. But they get a permanent peering, and they're seeing things before their eyes just age. And they're stuck in amber. And they're seeing things go before them slowly, and they can't get out of it. Kind of like a quantum quicksand. That, to me, is almost like a version of hell. Don't you think, Mustafa?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to think that that's not the case, that sounds absolutely awful. But the main reason why we cited that is because there have been instances where you'll actively be in an investigation and you're communicating with an entity who you're assuming it's an intelligent response. And, I've been in situations where, I would ask, well, what year is it? And you go through and you start asking, is it, 1950s? Is it the 40s? And you'll start getting responses that like, oh, it's this time period. And if you talk to people actively as if it's like a conversation that's happening in the present, that's how you're referred to. And even Brandon's captured EVPs of, was that Heritage Junction, Brandon, where you hear a woman with an English accent say, well, will that be on the train? And it's like you're capturing these moments in time. So I was just trying, and Brandon and I were just trying to kind of synthesize, okay, well, what's the data that we captured? There's photon events and there's pressure. So we started doing a bunch of research on photon events and pressure. And those are two of the biggest research points when it comes to black holes and the study of time, So if we have those points, and what we are experiencing are the echoes, so to speak, of matter, which is what we're just comprised of, is matter.
Right.
If it retains a type of consciousness after we perish and our matter is kind of floating out into the ether, it would make sense that there would be correlations with pressure and light with this communication. Now, does that mean that there's a ghost kind of stuck there and watching every single one of their descendants in a blink of an eye, become born and then get into a job that they hate and then go through a couple of divorces and then die? Yeah, that does sound like a version of hell. I don't know if that's the case. I kind of feel like, our understanding of time is that it's linear, but that we all know that that's not what it is. So we're just peering into these perforated pockets of time. And that's who we're speaking to, and we just happen to be at the right place at the right time.
So let me throw this at you, Mustafa, real quick. There's an article that came out, I believe it was a year or two ago, that scientists truly do believe now that heaven may be just a quantum universe, that it may just, that's where the energy goes. You've even cited in the book that energy is neither created nor destroyed. It has to go somewhere. And scientists are really wrapping themselves around the theory that there is this quantum universe that the soul, so to speak, has to go. Would this fit somewhere into where you guys are thinking? And does that line up with the time travel theory, or is that a totally separate thing?
I don't know. I think it's kind of that's a little too heady and a little too kind of, I think personally that it's not really conducive to research. Heaven, if you want to talk about that, as far as I'm concerned, heaven's right now. And what are you going to do about your situation right now? And that same goes for an investigation. What are you going to do to try to do the best work possible that's going to make you feel great right now? And if our matter does retain some type of consciousness after we die, I want to fill my consciousness up, as Instagram quotey positive thinking as this sounds and kind of corny, but it's the goddamn truth. Mm-hmm. Is that if my consciousness does carry on after I persist, I want to fill that up with a bunch of moments. And I think Brandon's the same way, that I'm proud of, that make me happy. And, if I am stuck in amber, I want it to be a really, really, really great amber. So yeah. There you go. That's good. That answers your question.
Brandon, do you concur?
Yeah. You think about quantum consciousness and you think about, interdimensional type phenomena and things like that. Energy is neither created nor destroyed. Where does that energy go when we die? And does it retain consciousness is the big question. I mean, that has to go somewhere. Where is that? And you start to think about quantum physics and quantum consciousness, things like that. And the universe itself, photon events, pressure, it's a deep, deep rabbit hole. And I definitely think it has to go somewhere. And it's very possible that there's a, quantum, realm and, different, universes out there that it may retain. And somehow that consciousness that's floating out there in the universe can make its way back on Earth at times, and that can go with the black hole theory and stuff like that. But I definitely think there's something out there. I definitely think there is life after death. And I think that there is consciousness retained after death. It's just a matter of where is it at? How do we perceive it? And how do we interact with it? And I think we're getting closer. And I think in the next 20, 30 years with, the advancement of technology and the scientific community becoming so interested in the possibility of life after death, I think that we're going to have some really serious players out there, academia and scientists that are really going to start to look at life after death. And I think that we'll have some more answers. Will we have the end all be all answers? Probably not, but I think that we'll have a better understanding.
Absolutely. Well, on that note, we're going to end today's program, although we probably could go quite a bit longer. This is where we should leave it because I want you guys to read the rest of it. It is a fascinating book. It's a great book. And like I said, it's a quick read. You'll get into it and you won't want to put it down. The name of the book is Elements of a Haunting, Connecting History with Science to Uncover the Greatest Ghost Stories Ever Told. Our guests today, Brandon Alvis and Mustafa Gotallari. Guys, do you have future stuff you want to plug real quick that you got coming up? Mustafa?
Yeah, Brandon and I are working on something. We can't really say what it is, but a press release will be coming out in the next couple of weeks. Follow our socials, Toph Gatto on Twitter, M Gotallari on Instagram and everywhere else. And just reiterate what you said, buy a copy of Elements of a Haunting while we still have it, because we sold out on we were sold out for a few weeks there.
That's great. That's great. And we'll put up a link to the book. And by gosh, when it gets back into, is it back now in circulation?
Yeah.
Good. All right. Well, let's sell it out again. By gosh, let's get this thing out of circulation again. Let's do it again. Elements of a Haunting, connecting history with science to uncover the greatest ghost stories ever told. Brandon, Alvis, Mustafa Gotallari, thank you guys for being with me once again here on Darkness Radio. It's greatly appreciated.
Thanks, Tim.
Folks, thank you very much for a great week. Once again, we'll be back again next week with the best in paranormal talk radio. This has been Darkness Radio.